On a crisp autumn morning in a quiet suburban neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia, Angela Thompson's life changed forever. The 32-year-old elementary school teacher was driving to work in her silver Honda Civic, just like any other day. She had been teaching third grade for 8 years, loved by her students and respected by her colleagues. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tree-lined streets as she stopped at a red light, mentally preparing for the day's lessons. What happened next would spark a movement that would ripple through their community and beyond. A police cruiser's lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Angela, always mindful of proper protocol during traffic stops, pulled over immediately, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel. She had done nothing wrong, her registration was current, and she hadn't broken any traffic rules. Officer Richard Bennett approached her vehicle with his hand already resting on his holster, a detail that didn't escape Angela's notice. His tone was immediately aggressive as he demanded her license and registration. When Angela politely asked why she had been pulled over, the situation escalated rapidly. The officer's response was filled with condescension and thinly veiled racial slurs. As Angela reached for her documents in the glove compartment, exactly as she had informed the officer she would do, he suddenly yanked her car door open. Before she could process what was happening, she found herself being forcefully dragged from her vehicle. The officer's grip on her arm was so tight it left bruises, and in a moment of unchecked aggression, he struck her across the face. The entire incident lasted less than 5 minutes, but its impact would last a lifetime. Several bystanders had witnessed the encounter, and thankfully, multiple cell phones had captured the entire interaction. Mrs. Rodriguez, a local bakery owner opening her shop across the street, had filmed everything. A group of high school students waiting at a nearby bus stop had also recorded the incident, their young faces marked with horror and disbelief. Angela, despite her fear and pain, remained remarkably composed. Years of teaching had taught her the importance of staying calm in crisis situations. As she sat on the curb, tasting blood from her split lip, she made a decision. This wouldn't be another incident swept under the rug. She wouldn't let her students grow up in a world where such behavior was normalized. More patrol cars arrived at the scene, followed by an ambulance. The responding officers, notably more professional than Officer Bennett, took statements from the witnesses. Angela noticed how some of her neighbors who had gathered around were filming everything, ensuring that every detail was documented. Mrs. Rodriguez had already approached her, offering both her video evidence and her willingness to testify about what she had seen. In the ambulance, as paramedics treated her injuries, Angela made several crucial phone calls. First to her school principal, explaining why she wouldn't make it to class that day. Then to her sister, a civil rights attorney in downtown Atlanta. Finally, to her mother, who had always taught her to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The story might have ended there, like so many similar incidents that had come before. But Angela Thompson was determined to make this time different. As she sat in the emergency room, being examined for her injuries, she thought about her students. She thought about how they looked up to her, how they trusted her to teach them right from wrong. She thought about all the other women who had faced similar situations but hadn't had the support or resources to fight back. News of the incident spread quickly through social media. The videos taken by witnesses went viral, showing the clear abuse of power and unnecessary force. Local news stations picked up the story, and by evening, Angela's face was on every major network in the city. But unlike many similar stories, this one wouldn't fade away after a few news cycles. Angela's sister helped her contact civil rights organizations and community leaders. Together, they began building a case that would not only address her individual incident but would push for systemic change in police training and accountability. The support from her community was overwhelming. Her students' parents organized peaceful protests. Local businesses put up signs supporting her cause. Even retired police officers came forward to condemn Officer Bennett's actions and offer their testimony about the department's need for reform. What made this case different was Angela's approach. She wasn't just fighting for justice for herself, she was fighting for change that would protect others in the future. She worked with community leaders to develop programs that would build better relationships between law enforcement and local residents. She spoke at schools about the importance of standing up to injustice while also emphasizing the value of peaceful resolution and proper legal channels. As weeks passed, more evidence emerged. Officer Bennett had a history of complaints filed against him, though most had been dismissed or buried in paperwork. Other victims, emboldened by Angela's courage, came forward with their own stories. The pattern of behavior became impossible to ignore, and department leadership was forced to take action. The incident had started as a moment of terror but was transforming into a catalyst for change. Angela's story wasn't just about one woman standing up to injustice, it was about a community coming together to say enough is enough. It was about turning pain into purpose, fear into determination, and anger into action. Through it all, Angela continued teaching. Her students, though young, understood that their teacher was showing them an important lesson about courage and justice. She used her experience to teach them about civic responsibility, peaceful protest, and the power of community action. When one of her students asked why she didn't just stay quiet, Angela explained that sometimes being brave means speaking up, even when it's scary. The legal proceedings moved forward, but Angela's focus remained on the bigger picture. She worked with police reform advocates to develop new training programs focused on de-escalation and racial sensitivity. She spoke at community meetings, sharing her story and listening to others' experiences. Her goal wasn't to divide the community but to heal it, to build bridges where there had been walls. The impact of her actions rippled outward. Other communities began implementing similar programs. Police departments in neighboring counties reviewed their training and accountability procedures. Angela's story became a case study in how one person's refusal to stay silent could lead to meaningful change. Looking back on that autumn morning, Angela realized that what had started as one of the worst days of her life had become the beginning of something powerful. Her bruises had healed, but the determination to create positive change had only grown stronger. She had shown her students, her community, and herself that one voice, raised in truth and supported by many, could make a difference. The story wasn't over. Real change takes time and continued effort. But Angela Thompson had proven that refusing to stay silent in the face of injustice was the first step toward creating the world she wanted her students to inherit. Her experience had become more than just another headline, it had become a testament to the power of courage, community, and unwavering determination to stand up for what's right. The days following the incident brought both challenges and unexpected support for Angela Thompson. As she sat in her living room, surrounded by get-well cards from her students and bouquets from concerned neighbors, she received a call that would change the course of her fight for justice. A retired police sergeant named David Chen had seen the viral videos and recognized Officer Bennett from his days on the force. "What happened to you wasn't an isolated incident," Chen explained over the phone, his voice heavy with years of witnessed injustice. "I tried reporting his behavior multiple times before I retired, but nothing ever came of it." Chen's testimony would prove invaluable in the weeks to come, as he provided detailed documentation of previous incidents that had been swept under the rug. The local media coverage intensified when surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store emerged, showing the entire incident from another angle. This new evidence clearly demonstrated that Angela had done nothing to provoke the officer's aggressive behavior. The store owner, Mr. Patel, had immediately turned over the footage when he learned about the incident. "In my 20 years running this store," he told reporters, "I've never seen such a clear abuse of power." Angela's sister, Joyce, working tirelessly on the legal case, discovered a pattern of similar incidents in neighboring counties. "It's not just about one officer," Joyce explained during a community meeting at the local church. "It's about a system that allows these incidents to happen and then covers them up." The church basement was packed with concerned citizens, many of whom had their own stories to share. The school where Angela taught became an unexpected hub of support and activism. Her principal, Dr. Richardson, took a bold stance by implementing new curriculum units about civil rights and community engagement. Our students need to understand both their rights and their responsibilities as citizens, she explained during a school board meeting. Ms. Thompson's experience has become a powerful teaching moment for our entire school community. Angela's third-grade students, though young, showed remarkable understanding and empathy. They started a letter-writing campaign to local officials, their childish handwriting conveying profound messages about fairness and justice. One student wrote, "My teacher shows us every day that being brave means doing what's right, even when it's scary." These letters, in their innocent wisdom, touched hearts and opened minds throughout the community. The police department, initially defensive and dismissive, found itself under increasing pressure as more evidence emerged. Internal Affairs launched an investigation, not just into Officer Bennett's actions that day, but into his entire service record. Other officers, inspired by Sergeant Chen's courage, began coming forward with their own observations and concerns. Community organizations rallied around Angela's cause. The local chapter of the Urban League organized peaceful demonstrations that brought together people from all walks of life. Religious leaders, business owners, and ordinary citizens joined forces to demand accountability and reform. What started as one woman's struggle for justice was becoming a movement for systemic change. Angela's story caught the attention of state legislators. Representative Williams, who had been working on police reform legislation, invited her to testify at the state capitol. "Your experience, and more importantly, your response to it, highlights exactly why we need comprehensive reform," the representative told her. Angela's testimony, delivered with quiet dignity and compelling clarity, left a lasting impression on the legislative committee. The trauma of the incident still affected Angela. Some mornings, she found herself hesitating before getting into her car, the memory of that day still fresh in her mind. But she refused to let fear control her life. Instead, she channeled her anxiety into action, working with a trauma counselor who helped her process her experience and use it to help others. Local businesses stepped up to support the cause. The owner of a popular coffee shop hosted weekly community discussions about police-community relations. A printing company donated materials for awareness campaigns. The local newspaper ran a series of in-depth articles examining similar incidents and proposing solutions for reform. Angela's mother, a retired social worker, became her strongest supporter and advisor. "Baby," she would say, "sometimes God puts us in difficult situations because He knows we're strong enough to create change." Her mother's wisdom and experience helped Angela navigate the complex emotions and challenges she faced. The incident had unexpected ripple effects throughout the community. Young people, particularly those who had witnessed or recorded the incident, became more engaged in civic activities. Local colleges reported increased interest in criminal justice and civil rights law programs. The videos of Angela's encounter became teaching tools in police training academies across the state. As weeks turned into months, Angela's case gained momentum. The evidence was overwhelming, but more importantly, the community's demand for change was unwavering. Officer Bennett was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation, but Angela knew that removing one officer wasn't enough. The system itself needed to change. Working with her sister and other activists, Angela helped develop a comprehensive proposal for police reform. The proposal included mandatory de-escalation training, improved accountability measures, and community oversight boards. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about creating a better relationship between law enforcement and the community they served. Through it all, Angela continued teaching her students about more than just reading and math. She taught them about resilience, about standing up for what's right, and about the power of community. Her classroom became a model for how to discuss difficult topics with young children in age-appropriate ways that empowered rather than frightened them. The support she received from her students' parents was particularly touching. They organized meal trains when she had long days of meetings and testimonies. They attended hearings and demonstrations, showing their children what it means to stand up for someone you believe in. One parent, a graphic designer, created powerful social media campaigns that helped spread awareness of the case. 3 months after the incident, Angela's case reached a crucial turning point. The Internal Affairs investigation had uncovered a troubling pattern of misconduct in Officer Bennett's record, including multiple complaints that had been dismissed without proper investigation. The evidence was impossible to ignore, especially after 3 other officers came forward with their own accounts of witnessing his discriminatory behavior. The district attorney's office, under mounting public pressure, announced they would pursue charges against Officer Bennett. The press conference, held on a cold winter morning, drew hundreds of community members. As the DA outlined the charges, Angela stood quietly among the crowd, her sister Joyce by her side. The moment felt surreal, a mix of vindication and sadness that such action was necessary at all. The local police union initially tried to defend Officer Bennett, but their position became untenable as more evidence emerged. A senior union representative, speaking on condition of anonymity, admitted, "We can't defend the indefensible. This kind of behavior undermines everything we're supposed to stand for." This admission marked a significant shift in the traditional blue wall of silence. Angela's story had begun to attract national attention. Civil rights organizations from across the country reached out to offer support and resources. A prominent civil rights attorney from Washington, D.C. joined Joyce in representing Angela, bringing additional expertise and media attention to the case. But Angela remained focused on her local community, knowing that real change would start at home. The school board organized a district-wide initiative on civil rights education, inspired by how Angela had handled her situation. Teachers from other schools began asking her to speak to their classes about civic responsibility and peaceful activism. Even the youngest students seemed to grasp the fundamental message. Standing up for what's right might be scary, but it's necessary for change. One particularly moving moment came when Angela received a letter from a retired black female officer who had left the force 20 years ago due to similar experiences. "I wish I had had your courage," the letter read. "Maybe if I had spoken up then, things would be different now." The 2 women later met and formed a powerful alliance, working together to develop training programs for new officers. The impact of Angela's case spread beyond the police department. Local government officials began reviewing policies in all public service departments. The city council established a civilian oversight committee with real power to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary action. Angela was invited to serve on the committee, though she initially hesitated, wondering if it might be too much alongside her teaching duties. Her students continued to be her greatest source of inspiration. During a parent-teacher conference, one mother broke down crying, explaining how her daughter had stood up to bullying at school by citing Ms. Thompson's brave example. The incident had transformed from a moment of trauma into a lesson in courage that was inspiring people of all ages. The legal proceedings moved forward, though not without challenges. Officer Bennett's defense team tried to paint Angela as an aggressor, but the multiple videos and witness testimonies told a different story. The preliminary hearings drew large crowds, with community members filling the courthouse corridors in silent support. Local artists created powerful murals around the city, depicting scenes of justice and community unity. Angela's story became part of a larger national conversation about police reform. News outlets from major cities requested interviews, but she remained selective, choosing to speak primarily with journalists who focused on the systemic issues rather than sensationalizing her personal trauma. "This isn't about me," she would say. "It's about creating a safer community for everyone." The support from fellow educators proved particularly meaningful. Teachers from across the state incorporated discussions about civil rights and civic responsibility into their lessons, using age-appropriate materials developed with Angela's input. The State Teachers Union even created a scholarship in her name for students pursuing careers in education or civil rights law. As winter turned to spring, Angela noticed subtle changes in her community. Police officers began attending neighborhood events out of uniform, engaging with residents in casual conversations. The local police academy invited community members to participate in training sessions, fostering understanding on both sides. These small steps represented the beginning of real change. Dr. Richardson, Angela's principal, implemented a new conflict resolution program at their school. Students learned about mediation, peaceful protest, and the importance of speaking up against injustice. The program became so successful that other schools in the district began adopting it. "We're not just teaching academic subjects," Dr. Richardson explained. "We're teaching children how to be responsible citizens." The case had unexpected ripple effects in neighboring communities. Other police departments began proactively reviewing their policies and procedures. Some chiefs of police reached out to Angela and her team for guidance on implementing reforms. The movement she had sparked was growing beyond anything she could have imagined. Through it all, Angela maintained her dignity and composure. She refused to let anger or bitterness cloud her message of positive change. During a community forum, she explained, "We can acknowledge pain and injustice without letting it define us. What defines us is how we work together to create something better." The process of healing continued, both for Angela personally and for the community as a whole. Her regular therapy sessions helped her process the trauma, and she encouraged others to seek help when needed. The local mental health center even started a support group for individuals who had experienced similar incidents, creating a safe space for sharing and healing. As the legal case progressed, Angela focused on the future. She worked with education experts to develop a curriculum that would help students understand their rights and responsibilities as citizens. The curriculum included role-playing exercises, discussions about historical civil rights movements, and projects that encouraged community involvement. As spring bloomed in Atlanta, the impact of Angela's case continued to grow in unexpected ways. The preliminary hearings had concluded, and Officer Bennett was facing not only criminal charges but also a separate civil rights investigation by federal authorities. The evidence had become so compelling that even his strongest supporters within the department had fallen silent. The transformation within the police department itself was remarkable. Under new leadership, the department had begun implementing sweeping reforms. The chief of police, a veteran officer with 30 years of service, publicly acknowledged the need for change. "Ms. Thompson's case opened our eyes to problems we had ignored for too long," he admitted during a town hall meeting. "We're committed to earning back the community's trust." Angela's classroom had become a model for how to teach young children about civic engagement. Education specialists from universities visited regularly, studying how she integrated lessons about justice and community involvement into standard curriculum. One morning, as her students worked on a project about community helpers, a little girl raised her hand and asked, "Ms. Thompson, can we be brave like you when we grow up?" That simple question brought tears to Angela's eyes. "You can be brave right now," she answered. "Being brave means doing what's right, even in small ways, every single day." The moment was captured by a documentary crew that had been following the case's impact on the community, and it became one of the most powerful scenes in their film. The documentary project had started as a local initiative but grew into something much larger. Filmmakers followed not only Angela's legal battle but also the ripple effects throughout the community. They captured the formation of new community policing programs, the establishment of civilian oversight committees, and the personal stories of people inspired to speak up against injustice. Joyce, Angela's sister, had become a sought-after speaker on police reform and civil rights law. Law schools invited her to share the legal strategies they had developed, while police academies requested her input on training programs. "What we learned from Angela's case," she would tell audiences, is that change happens when we combine legal action with community engagement. The support group that had formed in the wake of Angela's incident had grown into a formal organization dedicated to helping victims of police misconduct. They provided legal resources, counseling services, and most importantly, a sense of community for people who had experienced similar trauma. Angela attended meetings when she could, sharing her story and listening to others with genuine empathy. One unexpected development came from the business community. Local companies, initially hesitant to take sides, began actively supporting police reform initiatives. The Chamber of Commerce established a fund for community policing programs, and several major employers implemented training programs about racial bias and civil rights. Mr. Patel, the convenience store owner who had provided the surveillance footage, became a leading voice for small business owners supporting reform. The local media's coverage of the case had evolved from sensational headlines to thoughtful analysis. The city's major newspaper ran a series examining the history of police-community relations, featuring stories from multiple perspectives. They highlighted not only problems but also solutions, showcasing successful reform programs from other cities and examining how they could be implemented locally. Angela's mother, watching her daughter navigate these challenges, organized a support network for families affected by similar incidents. Healing doesn't happen in isolation, she would say during their weekly meetings. We need to support not just the victims, but their families too. The group provided practical help, cooking meals, offering childcare, attending court hearings, and emotional support. The case had begun to influence police department policies across the state. Other cities sent representatives to study the reforms being implemented in Atlanta. The governor's office formed a task force on police accountability, and Angela was invited to serve as a civilian advisor. Her experience as an educator brought a unique perspective to discussions about community engagement and training. In her personal life, Angela continued to heal. The physical bruises had long since faded, but the emotional recovery was ongoing. Her therapist helped her understand that her advocacy work, while important, shouldn't come at the expense of her own well-being. She learned to balance her activism with self-care, taking time to rest and reflect. The school year was drawing to a close, and Angela's students had grown in ways that went beyond academic achievements. They had learned about empathy, justice, and the power of speaking up. During the spring concert, they surprised her by performing a song they had written about standing up for what's right. There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. The legal proceedings entered a new phase as federal investigators uncovered evidence of systemic problems within the department. Their findings supported what Angela and her supporters had been saying all along, that her incident was not isolated but part of a pattern that needed addressing. The investigation led to a consent decree requiring substantial reforms in department policies and practices. Community leaders from other cities began reaching out to learn from Atlanta's experience. Angela and Joyce developed a framework for community-based police reform that could be adapted to different contexts. They emphasized the importance of including all stakeholders, law enforcement, community members, business owners, and local government, in the reform process. The documentary about Angela's case was selected for several film festivals, bringing national attention to the issues of police reform and community activism. But more importantly, it sparked conversations in living rooms and classrooms across the country about what ordinary citizens could do to promote justice in their own communities. As summer approached, Angela reflected on how much had changed in less than a year. The incident that had seemed like the worst moment of her life had become a catalyst for positive change. She hadn't chosen this role, but she had embraced it with grace and determination, turning her pain into purpose. As summer settled over Atlanta, the momentum for change showed no signs of slowing down. The federal investigation had expanded beyond Officer Bennett to examine departmental practices spanning the past decade. What they uncovered led to a comprehensive overhaul of police training and accountability measures across the state. Angela's influence had grown far beyond her original intentions. Universities began inviting her to speak to education and criminal justice students about the intersection of community activism and teaching. During one particularly moving lecture, a young police cadet stood up and shared how her story had influenced his decision to join the force. "I want to be part of the change," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to show that law enforcement can protect and serve all communities equally." The documentary about Angela's case premiered at a local theater, drawing an overflow crowd. The filmmakers had captured not just the incident and its aftermath, but the ripple effects throughout the community. Watching herself on screen was surreal for Angela, but what moved her most were the interviews with her students and their parents, describing how her example had changed their lives. Mrs. Rodriguez, the bakery owner who had filmed the initial incident, had become an unlikely advocate for police reform. Her business became a meeting place for community organizers and police officers participating in the new community engagement program. "Breaking bread together," she would say, "setting out fresh pastries, is the first step to breaking down barriers." The Civilian Oversight Committee, on which Angela now served, had begun showing real results. Their recommendations led to the implementation of body cameras for all officers, enhanced de-escalation training, and regular community feedback sessions. More importantly, their investigations into misconduct complaints were transparent and thorough, helping restore public trust in the process. Angela's third-grade classroom had become a model for teaching civic engagement to young children. Educational consultants observed how she integrated discussions about justice and community responsibility into daily lessons. One morning, during a math lesson about graphs, she used community policing statistics to teach percentages, sparking a thoughtful discussion about how numbers tell human stories. The support group for families affected by police misconduct had grown into a formal nonprofit organization, with chapters opening in neighboring cities. They provided not just emotional support, but practical assistance, helping victims navigate legal processes, connecting them with resources, and advocating for their rights. Angela's mother served as the organization's first executive director, bringing years of social work experience to the role. Officer Bennett's trial date was approaching, but Angela found herself focusing less on punishment and more on prevention. Working with Joyce and other advocates, she helped develop a comprehensive police reform package that included mandatory cultural sensitivity training, regular psychological evaluations for officers, and community service requirements. The proposal gained support from both law enforcement leadership and civil rights organizations. The school year ended with a powerful ceremony. Angela's students presented projects about community heroes, many choosing to focus on ordinary people who had stood up for what was right. One student interviewed Mrs. Rodriguez about the importance of being a witness to injustice. Another spoke with Sergeant Chen about why police officers must hold each other accountable. Their understanding of these complex issues brought hope for the future. Local businesses continued to play a crucial role in supporting reform efforts. Mr. Patel's convenience store hosted monthly Coffee with Cops events, where officers and community members could interact informally. Other business owners followed suit, creating spaces for dialogue and understanding. The Chamber of Commerce established a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in law enforcement or criminal justice. The changes within the police department were becoming evident in daily interactions. Officers participated in community events, coached youth sports teams, and attended neighborhood meetings. The new training programs emphasized de-escalation techniques and cultural competency. Veteran officers mentored new recruits, sharing lessons learned from past mistakes and emphasizing the importance of building community trust. Dr. Richardson, Angela's principal, implemented a school-wide program called Voices for Change, encouraging students to identify and address problems in their community. The program spread to other schools in the district, empowering young people to become active citizens. Angela's students were often invited to speak at these events, sharing what they had learned about courage and advocacy. The documentary about Angela's case was picked up by a major streaming service, bringing her story to a national audience. But what touched her most were the local screenings in community centers and schools, where real conversations about change happened. After one screening, a teenage girl approached her with tears in her eyes, saying, "You showed me that one person really can make a difference." Joyce's law firm had begun offering pro bono services to victims of police misconduct, while also working with police departments on implementing reforms. She and Angela often spoke together at conferences, sharing their perspective on how legal advocacy and community activism could work hand in hand. Their approach became known as the Thompson model of police reform, emphasizing collaboration over confrontation. Angela's healing journey continued. She still attended therapy sessions, understanding that processing trauma was an ongoing process. But she had found strength in her purpose, and joy in seeing positive changes in her community. Her therapist noted how she had transformed her pain into power, using her experience to help others find their voice. The summer brought new initiatives. The police department launched a youth academy, where teenagers could learn about law enforcement while sharing their perspectives on community relations. Angela's students were invited to create artwork for the academy's walls, depicting their vision of a safe and just community. Their colorful murals showed police officers and citizens working together, a powerful symbol of hope for the future. As the trial date approached, Angela reflected on how far they had come. The incident that had left her bruised and frightened had sparked a movement larger than herself. She thought about her students, about Mrs. Rodriguez and Mr. Patel, about Sergeant Chen and all the others who had found the courage to speak up. Their collective voices had created a symphony of change, proving that when people stand together, justice becomes possible. 1 year after the incident that changed her life, Angela Thompson stood at the podium in the state capitol building. The governor was signing comprehensive police reform legislation that had become known as the Thompson Act. As she looked out over the crowd, she saw familiar faces, Mrs. Rodriguez wiping tears from her eyes, Mr. Patel nodding proudly, her students sitting with their parents, and her mother beaming from the front row. The legislation represented everything they had fought for over the past year. It mandated body cameras, required comprehensive de-escalation training, established civilian oversight boards with real power, and created new accountability measures for officer misconduct. But more than the legal changes, it represented a shift in how communities and law enforcement could work together for positive change. Officer Bennett's trial had concluded a month earlier. The evidence, including testimony from fellow officers and multiple video recordings, had been overwhelming. The jury delivered a guilty verdict after just 4 hours of deliberation. But for Angela, the verdict wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability and the promise of change. The police department had undergone a remarkable transformation. The new chief, a woman with a background in community relations, had implemented many of the reforms before they became law. Regular community feedback sessions, increased transparency in misconduct investigations, and cultural sensitivity training were now standard practice. More importantly, the department's culture had shifted from an us versus them mentality to one of genuine community service. Angela's classroom continued to be a laboratory for positive change. Her students had learned lessons that went far beyond the standard curriculum. They understood concepts like civic responsibility, peaceful advocacy, and the power of unity in ways that most adults were still grappling with. During their end-of-year presentations, each student shared how they planned to make their community better. The support organization founded by Angela's mother had expanded to 15 cities across the country. They provided legal aid, counseling services, and advocacy training to communities dealing with similar issues. Angela often spoke at their events, sharing not just her story but the practical lessons they had learned about creating sustainable change. Mrs. Rodriguez's bakery had become a symbol of community unity. Police officers and community members regularly gathered there for informal discussions over coffee and pastries. The walls were covered with photographs documenting the year's journey. Protests turned to progress, confrontation transformed into conversation, fear replaced by understanding. The documentary about Angela's case had won several awards, but more importantly, it had become a teaching tool in police academies and community organizations across the country. Departments used it to show how a single incident of misconduct could damage community trust, but also how a commitment to reform could rebuild those broken bonds. Joyce's law firm had established a civil rights division, dedicated to both advocacy and education. They worked with police departments on implementing reforms while also representing victims of misconduct. The Thompson model they had developed, emphasizing collaboration, education, and systemic change, was being studied and adopted by other communities facing similar challenges. Angela's healing journey had taken unexpected turns. She still had moments when the memory of that morning would make her hands shake, but she had found strength in purpose. Her therapist helped her understand that her advocacy work wasn't just about changing systems, it was about reclaiming her own power and helping others find theirs. The school district's Voices for Change program had spread to 50 schools across the state. Students were learning about civic engagement, peaceful advocacy, and the importance of speaking up against injustice. Angela's original third-grade class, now in fourth grade, had become peer mentors, helping younger students understand these complex issues. Mr. Patel had expanded his community involvement, organizing a business alliance for social justice. Local companies provided internships, mentoring programs, and financial support for community initiatives. The alliance worked closely with the police department's community engagement division, creating opportunities for positive interaction between officers and residents. Sergeant Chen, who had first come forward with evidence about Officer Bennett's past conduct, was now leading the department's internal affairs division. His commitment to accountability and transparency had earned him respect from both officers and community members. He often cited Angela's case as a turning point in his career, showing him the importance of speaking up against misconduct. The Civilian Oversight Committee had become a model for other cities. Their investigations were thorough and transparent, their recommendations were implemented, and their membership reflected the community's diversity. Angela's experience as an educator brought a unique perspective to their work, especially in cases involving young people. As summer turned to fall, Angela prepared to welcome a new class of third graders. Her classroom walls now featured a quote that had become her mantra: "Courage isn't about being fearless, it's about doing what's right, even when you're afraid." Below it hung pictures drawn by her previous students, showing their visions of a community where everyone felt safe and respected. The ripple effects of her case continued to spread. Other teachers incorporated civil rights and civic responsibility into their lessons. Police departments reached out for guidance on reform initiatives. Community organizations used her story to inspire others to speak up against injustice. But for Angela, the most meaningful impact was still in the small, daily interactions: a student standing up to bullying, a neighbor helping someone in need, a police officer taking time to listen to community concerns. One morning, as Angela drove to school along the same route where everything had changed a year ago, she noticed something different. The fear that had once gripped her during traffic stops had been replaced by a sense of purpose. She knew there was still work to be done, but she also knew that real change was possible when people came together with courage and determination. Looking back on that autumn morning that had changed her life, Angela realized that what had started as a moment of trauma had become a movement of transformation. Her refusal to stay silent had sparked changes that would impact generations to come. But more than the legal reforms or policy changes, she was proud of how her community had come together, turning pain into purpose and fear into hope for a better future.